Hello everyone and welcome back. So recently at work I got tasked with creating a NodeJS API that works in Lambda, and it turns out that wasn't as straightforward as I thought it was going to be. I thought you'd literally just create one how you normally would, like a normal NodeJS API, but it works a little bit differently because we're using API Gateway as well. So I thought I'd do a tutorial on it. I kind of took a bit of time to figure out how to do it. So I thought that this might be useful for anybody else that's going through the same thing I went through. So we'll get started. The first thing I'm going to do is create a Lambda function. So we'll just call it like test Lambda API, something like that. Node.js 22, that's fine. I think everything else is fine just to leave as is. So we'll create that. Hopefully that works out fine. So there's a few things you have to consider when you're making an API using Lambda. And that is that you need something to kind of trigger the Lambda function. And in our case, we're going to be using API Gateway. So if we go to configuration and we go to triggers, or you can click this add trigger here, you can add trigger, select source, and go to API Gateway. And we'll create a new API, and we will build a REST API. I think that's the one to go with. To be honest with you, I don't fully know the difference between these two, but I think I normally use REST API, or at least when I was working on the stuff at work, I used REST API, I think. So we'll go with that. I'm sure you can experiment with HTTP API if you want to. And I think everything else is fine. So we'll leave security to open, because if we want to add authentication, we'll be adding it into the code and not relying on API Gateway, although you can do that if you want to. So we'll add that in, and that should create a trigger for us. API Gateway. Now, we need to modify this. I'll just get rid of that. So we'll just go to this one. At the moment, it's got /test Lambda API. So this is an endpoint, and it accepts any method, right? So you can do a post to this, you can do a get to this. The problem is, and this is kind of the problem I was having, is I kind of want to handle the routing within the Lambda function. So normally, well, there's kind of two ways I can see you doing this in API Gateway. Either you create an endpoint for every endpoint you need. So for example, if you needed a user's endpoint, you could create like /users. And you can also do /users/ID. So you can add parameters in there as well. And then you can basically route it to a Lambda function, right? So you can have a Lambda function dedicated to users. You can have one dedicated to, I don't know, blog posts or products or whatever. Kind of like microservices, I suppose. And that would work, but I kind of like the idea of having just one API that's the API Gateway routes to, and then I handle the routing within that. So the big problem that you have with that is, and we'll get to how to solve this in a second, but what API Gateway will do is it will invoke the Lambda, and it will pass in an event, which you'll see here. If we go to code, you'll see that and sorry, this is probably too small. Let me just quickly, there we go. Hopefully you can see that. So you can see here it passes in this event. Now what this event is a JSON object with the sort of stuff that you would normally get from a HTTP request, so like headers and the body and stuff like that. But it's formatted differently, and it's formatted in such a way that something like Express or Fastify or Happy or whatever you want to use won't understand it, because it's expecting a HTTP request. So because of that, we have to figure out a way of kind of transforming it into a way that Express will understand, so that we can use Express for routing, which is what we're going to be doing in this video. So what we need to do is basically forward any request that goes to API Gateway onto Lambda. So we can get rid of this resource here, so we'll delete this. And what we need to do is create something called a proxy. So if we create resource, and we create a proxy resource, and we give it the path, so the path is just going to be proxy plus. I think you can call this anything. I think you can call it any plus, or you know, I don't know, endpoint plus, whatever you want to call it, but proxy plus seems to be the kind of convention. And if we just create that, I think this will be fine. Yeah, there we go. So it's created proxy plus, and we've got any as well. So this is, you know, we can send a post to this, we can send a put to this, we can send a get to this, which is what we want. And now we need to edit integration. So what we want to do is send this to a Lambda function, which we've specified here. So this is test Lambda API, which is the one we've just created, this one here. And we want to select Lambda proxy integration. So it'll send the request to your Lambda function as a structured event, which is what we want. And that is pretty much everything we need, I think, in order to send a request. So I think we can test this if we go to, literally like any endpoint. So I need to find, I don't know where it is now. I think it's in configuration and triggers. Yeah, so if we go to the API endpoint, you can see that we're getting hello from Lambda. And the reason why is because this path here, so you've got this kind of, this domain here, which is, or this URL, this is kind of like the sort of staging domain that API Gateway gives you, and it goes /default, and then anything after the /default is your path, effectively. So we're going to /test Lambda API, and what's happening is we're not doing any checks in our code to see like where the endpoint should be routed to. So it's basically, no matter what we pass in, we could literally just pass in this, literally missing authentication token. Hang on a minute. I think I need to deploy the API. I think that's what's going wrong. So actually, what I was saying there was completely wrong. When you make a change, you need to deploy your API. So let me just quickly do that. And then if we do that and it's fine, so successfully created, it's right now. If we do it, it should be fine. There we go. Right, it took a little bit of time to update, but literally we can pass in anything and it will say hello from Lambda, which is the code that we have here. So that's fine, and that's all working. That's doing exactly what we want it to do. But at the moment, obviously, we're not actually routing it. So it's just calling this bit of code here in every single request, no matter what you pass in. So that's fine. So those things are set up though now, so we don't really have to do anything from this point onwards. Your API gateway is all set up. There's a ton of things that you can do, a ton of things you can play around with, authentication and stuff like that. But for us, this is everything we need, so we can get rid of that, and we can go back to our Lambda. So what we need to do now is actually write the code and then upload it to our Lambda. So what we'll do is we will open up our, well, I'm using PowerShell, obviously whatever you're using, your command line. And we will make a directory, and we'll just call it like Lambda, you're spelling it wrong, API function, something like that. And we'll cd into Lambda API function, and we should be able to do npm init-y. So that'll just create an empty npm project. Should do. We don't get much feedback apparently from, there we go. Right, we're all good. So we need to install some things. The first thing, npm I, and I can zoom in a bit actually. I keep forgetting to do that, and when I'm doing a video, I need to actually zoom in so people can see what's going on. So npm I to install, and the first thing we need is Express, which is going to be our routing library. The second thing we need is this thing called serverless HTTP. Now this is really important, and this is basically the thing that will allow Express to understand what API Gateway is passing through. So the event, the JSON object that API Gateway passes to the Lambda function, by default Express can't really understand what that is, but serverless HTTP will effectively transform that request into something that Express can understand, and then when we send a response from Express, it will then transform that response into something that API Gateway will understand. So it's effectively, it's changing the input and the output of the Lambda function effectively. So we'll install that. So it's literally just serverless HTTP. I'll just copy this one instead. Go back to PowerShell, paste that in. Oh, you need to put a space there. And I think the last thing we're going to need is .env. So if you install .env as well, and this is literally, there's something that I'm going to show later on, which I'm hoping works. I don't think I actually tested it at work yet, but basically one of the benefits of using Express, at least as far as I can see, is that not only can you do the routing for the Lambda function, but if you want to run it locally as well, when you're developing things, then it should work as well. So what we're going to do is basically say, if we're running this locally, we want to start a server. We don't just want to export the handler function, which is this function here. So this is kind of what AWS will call, effectively. This is the function it will call. Instead of exporting that, we can basically just start up the server and just kind of access it as you would normally locally, like localhost 8000 / todos / 1, something like that. So we should be able to do something where we can use it in the Lambda function, but also develop it locally, which is very convenient. One of the things that I've kind of struggled with kind of developing stuff using Lambda is working on it locally and working on it on Lambda. So like if I want to test something, if I make a change and I want to test it, I have to upload it to Lambda before I can test it. Whereas the way we're doing it now, we'll be able to actually just do that locally, which will be really useful. So that's everything we'll need. If we just press enter here, and it should install everything. And I will I will open this up in VS Code, and hopefully you can see that. I don't know if I've zoomed in a lot, but let me just let me just create index.js. And then how big is that? I think I probably need to zoom in a little bit. So maybe a bit more. There we go. That should be fine. Let me know in the comments, by the way, if you can't see. I know it doesn't really help for this video if you can't see what's going on, but do let me know if this is fine. So index.js. Actually, the first thing I wanted to do is edit the package.json a little bit. So the first thing I want to do is specify the type of, basically our code base is going to be type module, and that will allow us to use the module syntax, so like the import and export stuff. That's fine. And the second thing I want to do is something that's really useful, and it's called import mapping. So imports. And I think I did a tutorial earlier, quite a while ago actually, on NodeJS APIs and how to create one from scratch. If you're interested in looking at it, it's my most viewed video, and it might be quite useful actually to look at that after this video to get a better idea of how to create APIs in Node.js. But one of the things that I used in that was called module alias. And what that will basically allow you to do is, I don't know if I've got a good example from heart, but let's say you want to import something. So import something from, and then normally if you're dealing with something within your code base, you have to do something like this. .. And then it's like taking me all the way back to stuff I've got. It's taking me out of my Lambda API function directory. But let's say something, right, .js. So you'd have to do something like this. And that's it's a bit annoying. And when you've got this all over the code base and it looks like a bit of a mess, and if you've got deeply nested things, you have to keep doing this ... That's a pain. What would be nicer though if we could do something like this, import something from, and then we did, and this is how I used to do it. So I used to do @/resources, and the @ would basically mean the root of the directory, the file system, or this project, I suppose. /resources /something.js, something like that, right? So that's much nicer than this. And I was wanting to use module alias, but it turns out that Node.js now has something built in, which I didn't realize. So this is something kind of new for me, but I think maybe some people watching won't know it either. So it's very useful. And basically, if we do something like this, hashtag, and I think it has to start with a hash. So like that, I'm not a big fan of that, to be honest with you, but I don't really, I don't mind too much. But let's say we do something like this, resources, #resources / and then we do a star, and then do .js. And that's going to map to, in our case, and we haven't added this yet, by the way, we'll add this in a second, but ./source /resources /star.js. And basically what that's saying is, when I use this in an import, this #resources / this is going to be the thing that we use here. So I'll just do the example again. So import something from. So we'll be able to write something like this, #resources /something.js, right? So it's basically just saying that all the JS files in this directory can be used this way. So it's just mapping it to a sort of shorthand, which is very useful. So I'll get rid of these changes. And that's pretty much it for the package.json. There are a lot of other things you could do here. So for example, on the project I'm working on at work, I have middleware. So I'm doing something like this, which is basically just the same thing. I'll just copy it. So middleware.js, and then source, and then that'll just be middleware. So something like that. So you can add it basically as many of these as you want, and it just makes things a little bit cleaner, and you don't have to, do the ... thing. So that's much simpler. So hopefully that's useful for you. There is still module alias, the npm package, if you want to use that. But I do prefer using like built-in things. So the fact that this exists is very convenient. So that should work fine, hopefully. So I suppose we'll try it later on. The next thing I'm going to do is do the index file, which is kind of going to be the thing that kickstarts everything. So I'm going to import, first of all, I'm going to import .env /config. I think that should work. That should be fine. We'll import express from express. We'll import serverless from serverless HTTP. And we don't really have so I'm going to create a controller soon. I'm actually going to do basically a couple of test endpoints just to make sure everything's working fine. So we'll import them in a little bit, but we'll do const app is equal to express. We'll do const port. Now this will be important for the local development. We won't actually be starting up a HTTP server when we're on Lambda, right? That's something important to bear in mind. But what we'll do is we'll use this port to specify the port when we listen to this locally, right? So we'll do the app.listen and then pass in the port. So we'll do app.use, if I can spell. And we'll do express.json, and that's like that. And then we'll specify our routes down here. I'm not going to add them yet, but we'll specify routes here. And then we'll do if process.env is equal to local. We'll do app.listen. And then we'll pass in the port. And then we'll pass in a callback and basically say console.log. And we will say app is listening on port, and then we'll pass in the port that we specified earlier. So we've got this port here, so 8000. So locally, if our if our env file contains an env variable, it's a bit of a confusing naming there, but we'll go with it, env that's equal to local, we will start this server up. So it's kind of how an Express app would normally work, and we'll do that locally. And then what we need to do is specify the serverless stuff. So we'll do handle request. So this is the function that's going to handle the request for us. It's basically going to transform the request that comes in from API Gateway into something that Express can understand. So we'll do serverless and we'll pass in app. And passing in this app will help serverless to determine what we're actually using, so it can actually detect that we're using Express and then map things in a way that Express can understand. And then the last thing we need to do is export a handler function, and Lambda uses handler as its kind of default function to call, so it knows like, or when I invoke this Lambda function, I'm going to call the handler wait, I don't know if I messed up what I said there, but when I invoke the Lambda, I'm going to call handler by default. I think you can specify your own function, but I think most people just leave it as handler because that's kind of the standard thing to do. So we're going to make this async, and we're going to pass in event. Oh, got it wrong. And I don't know if you need to pass in the context as well. I think I might do that. So event and context. Because it can pass in, it passes in multiple things. I think event, context, and I think there's one other thing it passes in, but I don't think we need to worry about that so much. And then we'll basically do the result is going to be return await handle request, and then we'll pass in event and context on text. So what that should do is when the event comes in, it calls this handler function, it passes in event, which is basically the HTTP request, but as a JSON object. And then it passes it into this handle request function. And what it will do is it will transform it into a way that Express understands. And then it will basically just run through our app as normal. And then when it returns it, it will return something that API Gateway understands. So when we do res dot, why does it keep doing that? Resize by, I don't even think that's a Node.js function. Right, anyway. Res.send, and then we send something like hello. What it will do is it will take that, and then it will transform it into something that API Gateway understands. So it makes it much easier for us to do things, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a folder. You probably guess what folder I'm going to create, actually, because we've already actually specified it here in our import mapping. But we're going to create a source folder, first and foremost. So source. And then we're going to create a resources folder. So this is how I structure my APIs when I use Node.js. You can obviously do it however you want. I quite like this because it keeps everything that's related together. So for example, what I'm going to do is create a new folder called to-do. So this is the to-do resource. And then in here, what we'll do is we'll create to-do.controller.js. And then we'll create to-do.routes.js. So probably fairly obvious what both of these things do, but this will be where we specify all our routes. So what we're going to do is for each resource, we're going to create a subrouter, which is kind of a mini router within. So Express allows you to define your own routers and then kind of join them together, which is what we're going to do in the index.js file, which we'll do in a second. But what we'll do is we'll create this routes file first, and then we'll join everything together and then test it out, make sure it's working. So we need to import router, oh, I think it was actually, there we go. Yeah, it was auto-completing that. So import router from Express. And we actually do need this to-do controller. So we'll just specify this first and then do the routes. So what I'll do is I want function, we'll call it index. You can obviously call it whatever you want, but we'll call it index. And this is going to have rec.res as parameters. So this is actually just a normal express function. So you can call it from the router, which we'll do in a second. So it takes in rec.res, and there's also next as well, which you can obviously call. And if you need to do error handling or you need to create a middleware, then you can use next as well to go to the next. What do they call it? They call it something, the next... I forgot what they call it, but the next function basically, because these, when you pass these in, you can chain them. So effectively, the next function in the chain. So if you've got a middleware like an authentication middleware, if you call next like that, it will then go on to whatever the next function is. But that's more of an Express thing, maybe sort of outside the realm of this tutorial. It's more about just getting an API working in Lambda. But yeah, you can chain functions together as long as they've got rec, res, and next as their input parameters. But anyway, so what we'll do here is we'll do res dot, and then I think it is status, and we'll just put 200, and we'll do dot JSON, and we'll pass in message, and we'll just say hello. I'm friendly. Oh. Hello. And then we'll also do function, I can spell it right, function star. So this will be what gets posted to. So this will be a get function, and this will be a post function. So we'll do res.status, and we'll say 201, which means that a resource has been created, and we'll say JSON message to do created, something like that. We'll just keep it simple. I'm not going to delve into like hooking this up to, you know, a database and stuff like that. I think it's kind of outside the realm of this. I just want this to be something where you can actually get started with creating your own API. So this will get the job done. So we've got resources to do, we've got the to-do controller. So here we're going to import to-do controller from, and this is our first use of the import mapping. So we'll do from, and in this case, it's kind of hard to see how useful import mapping is, because obviously we could literally just do /to-do control, and maybe you would prefer doing that. There might be scenarios where that actually makes more sense. However, I'm going to stick to using the import mapping just to keep it kind of consistent throughout the code base, because there are going to be other areas. If you build out this API into something that's much more large scale, then it makes sense having this kind of standard way of doing things, and it even auto-completes for you, so you can literally just do to-do controller, and then I think we need JS at the end of this. So we'll do that, to-do controller.js, and then we're going to do const router equal to router, and then we'll do router.get. And this is what I was talking about when I was talking about the functions. So we'll do /todos, and then we'll pass in the function that we're going to call, which in our case is this. And I mentioned that you can chain functions. I will talk about that quickly. So if we had an authenticate, let's say, if that could literally be defined the exact same way as this with rec res, and then you would want next as well. So like this. And when you call next, it will go on to the next function. So if we did, for example, if we've got authenticate, this will be like a middleware function. And then we call our to-do controller, to-do controller dot, and then index, like this. Then what it will do is it will run this function first, and then when we call next here, obviously not in this function, but if we had authenticate as a function, we would call next, and then it would go on to this to-do controller dot index, and then we're returning the JSON here. So this will be the last function that gets ran, and it will return status 200 with the JSON containing message hello. So hopefully that makes sense. So router.get, and then we'll do router.post, and it'll be the same endpoint to do's. We'll follow kind of REST standards. And I need to get rid of authenticate because we don't actually have that. But if you did want to add middleware, you could add in source. You could do something like this, middleware, and then specify all your middleware in here. So /todos, and we'll do to-do controller dot and then store. So that'll be a post to /todos. And then what we need to do is just export default router like that. And then in our index.js, we need to define our routes. So we'll go to routes, and then we'll do app.use. We actually need to import it first. Let me just import it quickly. Import to-dos from, I'm on the next line, from hashtag resources /to-do, to-do.routes.js, and then app.use to-dos. So what this will do is it will register our routes here. So this express here, this const app is kind of like our main router, and then this router here is kind of a sub-router, and what we're basically doing is adding the routes from our sub-router to the main router. So basically when it gets passed from, when the request gets passed from API gateway, it will come into here and it will register these to-do routes, and then it will be able to actually send a request to /todos, and then it will go into here /todos, and then go to our controller, and then from here you can obviously run any of your business logic that you need. But that's basically it. We should be able to upload this now, and it should just work. When you're dealing with Lambda, you need to upload basically everything. Bit of a voice crack there for you. You need to upload basically everything. So you need to upload the node modules. Obviously, you need to upload the files. And also, in our case, I think we would need to upload our package.json because we have our imports. If you don't use import mapping, then I don't know if it's actually necessary for you to do it. I think it's fine, although we do specify type modules, so you may still need it for that. But if you're using common JS, then you might actually just not need package.json at all. That's something for you to explore. I would just upload it anyway, just in case, but especially in our case, if we're using type module and imports, so we need those things in there. because that's how JavaScript will know, whether you're using modules and the import mapping is from the package.json, so you'll need that when you upload it. But what we need to do to upload it is actually convert this to a zip, so we need to compress it, which on Windows is easy enough. Or it should be easy enough anyway. If you're using a MacBook, then you can use, I think there's literally a command line tool called zip, which you can use. And if you're using Linux, you can use, I've actually forgot what it's called now, tar? Is that it? I forgot if you use, there's a command line thing that I've used quite a lot, but for some reason now I can't remember it. But yeah, you'll be able to, you basically just need to compress everything into a zip file. So if you Google that, you should get an answer fairly easily on how to do that. So we've got this Lambda API function now. What I'm going to do is see if I can upload that. Upload from zip file. Yeah. Okay, I'm on my... I need to find my code folder. In here, users, JSON, code. God, I got so much rubbish in here. NodeJS, and then here we go. So we should be able to save that. And we should see in here, we should see all of our code. So index.js. Unable to read. Oh, that's a weird issue. Is that something to do with Windows compression? Is that? Yeah, that might be something to do with how Windows is compressing it, maybe. I don't know if there's a something that I can do. Fix that. I don't know. I'm going to be honest with you. So for work, I use a Mac. So I use a MacBook. So I haven't ran into this problem. It seems to be fine when I zip from a MacBook. But apparently it's not working properly here. Let me just check something. I mean, it seems fine. I don't know what's wrong with it. I mean, it's probably Windows doing something dumb, but anyway. The code might actually still run, so we might be fine. If I go to /todos, see if this works. Internal error, okay. So let's go to monitor and CloudWatch logs. And we'll start tailing this. So basically, for CloudWatch, if you can start tailing and then you run it, and it throws an error, you can see it in real time, which is nice. So, cannot find module index. X.mjs. All right, so after about 10 minutes of looking for a solution, I figured out there are two things wrong. The first one is, when you're creating your zip file to upload to the Lambda, first of all, you need to make sure you're only including the root. So what I was doing earlier is I was basically zipping the entire file. So when I would upload it, it would start off with Lambda API function. I can give it a test actually. So basically, if I go back to here and I upload this, you'll notice that it uploads a folder called Lambda API function, and then it's got my index.js, when in reality the index.js needs to be on the top level, on the root level, along with everything else. So that's why that was going wrong. And the second thing is, apparently when you zip things with Windows, it just doesn't work. So what I would do is, if you're on Windows anyway, but if you're not on Windows, you probably don't have to worry about this because you're using something better, most likely. What you have to do, and I'll just get rid of this and I'll show you. So you need to select everything and go to File. I'm using 7-zip, by the way. That's kind of what I've resorted to using. Add to Lambda API function.zip. So it'll create the zip file, and then when you go here, zip file, and go into Lambda API function, and then upload the zip. And now you'll notice that index.js is in the root, which is why it was failing before. And it also works. I can also open things up, which is fantastic. So that should be working now, hopefully, if I do this. /todos, internal server error, that's always good. Requested module does not provide an export named default. Let me check this. So let's have a look at our... Oh, yeah, okay, I've completely missed that. So export default, and then we'll do index and star. So that should be good. And if we go to 7-zip and we redo that, and you can automate this, by the way. When I do this on MacBook, I actually have a script called deploy, which literally just puts all files into a zip file, because macOS has a zip function. So you can literally just call zip function on all of the contents within the folder, and it will create a new zip with the folder's name, but it'll be like, so like in our case, it'll be a Lambda API functions.zip that just contains everything, and then I can just upload that. And obviously you can use something like GitHub Actions to do the same thing. So what we'll do is we'll zip this again. It's probably an easier way of doing this, but we'll add to Lambda API function, and then we'll upload this. So we now have an export, which I missed off because I was just getting too excited about getting things deployed. So I completely forgot about that. But now if we go to source, not middleware, to-do.controllers, we've got this export. So now, hello, yes. So we've got the message hello, which is good, and everything's running fine here. Look at that. So we can see the Lambda ran for 114 milliseconds, and yeah, everything works fine. So no more errors, which is good. So yeah, just make sure that you're zipping things properly. You just need the contents of the folder, not the folder itself. And you need to not use Windows. So I think that's what we've learned here. But if you are in Windows, then using 7-zip should work fine. So now what I want to do quickly is go to create to-dos. So I've opened up Insomnia, which is a HTTP client. So we can actually just send HTTP requests from here. And what we should do is, should be able to do is send a post request to, and we'll grab this URL here, and we'll put it into Insomnia. And we can change the body to be JSON. And if we just add something in, like message hello, that should be fine. And what we could do actually is change our code. So instead of returning a message that we've specified, we actually just return something from the request, which is, you know, what we passed in. So if we pass in, how should we do this? So what we could do actually, if we do const, let's do const. Oop. Message equals to rec dot body dot, and then I think we should just be able to do message there. And then if we just pass in message like this, we should get back our what we pass in. So I'm just going to get rid of this. Actually, yeah, I'll just get rid of this. Yeah. I just need to delete it. Wait, why is it? Oh, yeah, because it's trying to delete the name. Right, there we go. Nope. Add to Lambda function API, and we will upload that. So this is kind of what I was talking about when I said it was a pain in the ass to work on Lambda stuff. We should be able to run this locally, which I will test in a second. But now we have that, we should be able to send a post request to our endpoint and get hello back. And if we change this to just some gibberish, we get gibberish back, which is good. That's what we want. So that's working fine. And yeah, everything should work from this point from this point onwards. Obviously, you can add your own middleware to authenticate things. If you want to use, like, you know, JWTs or something like that, you can authenticate using that. So basically everything from like, so this, the only thing that's really different from a normal Express API to one that's in Lambda is this bit at the end. So literally just these few lines of code. These are the only things that are different. Everything else you can do exactly the same. So any Express tutorial, you can watch that and still follow along with it, but using Lambda. And the thing that I wanted to test the most is if, oh, you can see I was trying to use zip locally to see if it had a similar function to what macOS has. Yeah, what I wanted to do is see if I could do, oh, actually, I don't think I've set it up to do this. So let me just check something. Let me add a new script in here. So if we do dev, and we literally just have dev run node index.js. And this is how I would normally do things. So if I do npm run dev, it should hopefully create, hang on, node index.js, is that right? Oh, actually, yeah, that's the thing that we're missing. We need our end file. The reason why that didn't work is because we don't have our end file. So let me just add that in. .env, and we do env equals local, like that. And then if we run it again, what it should do is, because we've got .env up here, it should then pass that into process.env, and we should be able to call this env, or we should access this env variable here. So if we try that again, and we do npm run dev, app listening on port 8000, which is good. And hopefully what we should be able to do is just replace our URL with http localhost 8000 and /todos and see if that works. You can see we're getting the same thing. If we do the same thing but on a GET request, like this one, we should get message hello. So that proves my point. You can work on this locally, which is really good. Very useful, so you can test everything locally and then deploy it to Lambda, and it should effectively work the exact same way, except instead of calling app.listen, it will run this instead. I mean, it runs this anyway, but we don't really care locally. Like, if it's exporting this handler function, we're just not using it, so we don't need to wrap this in the same thing here. We don't need to do, like, else, and then, else use this. You can do that. It's up to you, but I don't think it's that necessary, because we're just not using this bit of code effectively. But we are using this, so locally it will do app.listen, and then we can use it, basically the same way we would use it if we were using like the live version, if that makes sense. So we don't need to, every time we want to test something's working, we don't need to then put it up to Lambda. We can just test it locally and then put it up to Lambda, which is much more convenient. So that is pretty much everything I wanted to cover. Hopefully that was useful. Sorry about the problem with the zip file. I wasn't anticipating that because I didn't think there would be an issue with Windows zip function. But yeah, apparently it doesn't work properly. But 7-zip came in clutch and was very useful. So thanks 7-zip for that. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Hopefully it was useful. And if you did, leave a like, subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. Goodbye.